But good morning, everyone. Good morning. Great to see everyone. I'm Don DePiro, your president and CEO of the Columbus Chamber of Commerce, and we're thrilled to have you for our Experience Series. Our Experience Series is a quarterly event focused on talent and workforce development. We're thrilled to have all of you, and it's great to be in this beautiful space at GBQ, an accounting and consulting and professional services firm. We have been doing this for several years now, and what's amazed me about our Experience Series and our workforce events is they're the best attended workshops and events that we have, and you could just see that it's just on top of everyone's minds, right? Trying to identify talent, trying to recruit and keep talent is just, a constant struggle for all of us. So we hope we all walk away this morning with some insight and wisdom, and we're all successful in our hiring and recruiting. Without further ado, we have a tremendous board chair at the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. You're going to meet her right now. Her name is Darcy Congrove. She's chaired our board for nearly 2 years, and she's done an amazing job. And when I came on as CEO about 6.5 years ago, going on 7 years, Darcy was asked to chair our workforce committee, and she had no idea what she was getting herself into. But Darcy has become steeped in her knowledge of workforce and talent and hiring and recruiting and what it takes for small and mid-sized businesses to be successful at this. And she's done an amazing job. Plus, she hosts this event at GBQ. If you don't know about this firm, you need to know about them. They're the largest regional accounting and consulting firm we have here in the Columbus region. They do an amazing job, and that's because they have an amazing leader. Please join me in welcoming Darcy Congrove.
Thank you. Thank you, Don. Don is always very generous in his introduction, so I appreciate that. Welcome to GBQ. This is our world headquarters. We were founded here in Columbus 69 years ago. We now have presence in Cincinnati and Toledo as well. We do everything that you would expect accounting firms to do, audits and tax returns and all of that stuff, but also a lot of other consulting services like cybersecurity and risk management and forensic accounting and dispute advisory services and all of those things. So if there's any reason that you ever need to think about an accountant, you should call us, as Don said. But we're here today to talk about workforce. I am leading GBQ at this point in my 13th year, been with the firm for a long, long time, and we have never, ever experienced the talent situation that all of us are dealing with right now. We had a shortage of people going into accounting prior to the pandemic, so we feel like we have learned a lot of lessons along the way about not just how to recruit talent, which I think is what everybody talks about. We have to find people, find people, find people. And we are not spending enough time talking about how we keep people, how we train people, how we listen to them, how we develop them, and how we help them really get to where they want to be. And so our goal, that's our entire team on the wall over there from all of the offices. And our goal is to understand exactly what every one of those people wants to do. And what we talk about is 3 overlapping circles of what are you best at, what do you really like, and what does the firm need? And we try to find a way to put as much of people's time into that center spot as possible. Obviously, there are things we all have to do in our jobs that maybe are not our favorite, but if we can get people aligned, we hope that we will have better success in serving our clients and in doing what we do. So that's where we are. We are always anxious to go to anything that's about workforce. And we're excited about culture here today. Very important to build a culture that keeps your team aligned with one another. What we know, we are fully hybrid at this point. So we have people coming and going all the time. We used to be together in this room on a very regular basis. And we have had a very hard time, I think, separating togetherness and the lack of togetherness from culture. And people say we've lost our culture because we're not together. And I completely disagree with that. I think they're different things. Presence and culture are different, but I think we have to work at it a little differently. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to hand it off to Kelly Fuller, who is going to kick off the program.
Thank you, Darcy. Good morning, everyone. As Darcy said, my name is Kelly Fuller. I'm the Vice President of Talent and Workforce Development here at the Columbus Chamber. And just if you haven't been to our experience series events before, just a little bit of background on why we do what we do and how we select the topics. So we have consultations with members throughout the year, and we sit down, all of us at the Chamber team. My role in workforce, it's specifically to talk about workforce issues. Where do we find people? Once we find them, how do we keep them? How do we engage them? How do we become a workplace of choice, an employer of choice? So when you come here to the experience series, what you're experiencing is the questions that our members are having when I'm out doing these one-on-one consultations. So we identify our topics based on what's top of mind with our members. So culture has been for quite some time. And Darcy mentioned some of the challenges when having a hybrid culture or trying to keep people engaged when the workplace itself has changed and shifted dramatically in the last 2.5 years. So today, we're going to be diving a little bit more deeply into that conversation. And I'm super excited to welcome my friends forward, our panel this morning. I'm Kate, Rose, and Darcy, if you guys would join me. Thanks. So let's get started with some introductions. I'm going to start at the end of the table with my friend Varsi. We'll work our way back. Just tell us a little bit about who you are and the organization you represent.
Hey everyone, super excited to be here today. So my name is Varsi Laurel. I'm representing my own consulting firm, Varsi Laurel LLC. I'm very focused on helping small businesses create inclusive environments. So I do that through DEIA assessments, similar to an organizational assessment. I also do training and workshops, and I'm a certified leadership coach.
Hi, I'm Rose Lawyer, and I work for NiSource. I'm the Director of Employee Relations. And I kind of look at us as the guardian of the culture. That's one of the things that we're responsible for in our organization. And I've been in the HR world a really long time. I've seen culture play out in very various ways in many different organizations, and excited to share some tips with you.
All right, Ankit Shah, and I'm representing two organizations today, Columbus State, where I serve as a supervisor in talent development and lead a team of trainers. And we provide ongoing training, whether it's soft skills, system-based, what have you, across the entire college. And then in addition to that, I also have my own consulting. It's called Inclusive Employee Consulting LLC, where I provide coaching to businesses as well as DEI trainings as well.
Well, thank you guys. So let's jump right into it. So how do you define culture when you think about specifically through the workplace, and what informs that culture? So we all know we have a culture, or maybe we think we do or we think we don't, but what informs the workplace culture?
Yeah, I think for me, culture is confirmed by how the people in your community feel. Right. So for me, culture is something that you can be intentional about setting up, but you also have to be intentional about checking in with your people to see, is the setup actually playing out the way you want it to? So more simply put, culture to me is people, how they feel.
Well, and to add to Varsity, I think about this all the time. And I've connected with so many different people over life, and we talk about culture. And if I were to come to you and ask, how do you define your own culture? What does that culture look like? Because I have had answers in the past that are like, well, I'm an American. What do you mean what my culture is? And I said, think about your upbringing. Think about how you even eat dinner together. Think about the way you celebrate different holidays. We all have our own set of cultures and how we think about, how we show up, the way we process things. So in the workplace, we all come with those background and experience. And how many times have we took a deeper dive in understanding who's around us and what their background experience is and what their own set of culture is? Have we had that conversation?
And to build on that, it's what do you desire your organization's culture to be? And to your point, it's intentional. To your point, it's ingrained. It's deeply held beliefs, assumptions, and behaviors. And so you can be intentional by defining what you want it to look like, what you want it to feel like, what you want it to sound like. And it does require deep thought about your own belief system and what you think is important in serving your customer or your audience. So this isn't a, it just kind of happens thing. It's very much you have to define and create it.
So how do I get started doing that? I'm a business and, we have a lot of small businesses that are members of the chamber as well as large organizations. And if I'm a small business, like what are some ways I can get started with defining my culture, my workplace culture?
Can I start? Because Darcy just gave you all a really good example, and I was like, oh, I love her. So think about your employees, and she's focused employee, right? Employee centric. What do all of those people need? And she said, what are they good at? What do they like? And then what do we need? And how does that intersect? So that's a belief and that's a behavior. So she's starting with, I want everyone to feel a part of this organization. I want them to show up at their best self, use their strengths. Let's not try to fix people's problems, and let's serve our customers with where we are best, right? That's a culture. She just gave it to you in three sentences. So I love that example. But no.
Yeah, and I would say to me, we need to give our employees an opportunity to have a voice. How do they define culture? How do they want to define culture? Because when we give them an opportunity to share their ideas and perspective and invite them to the table, that's when you co-create a culture, right? And need to be intentional. There needs to be prep work of maybe some focus groups and letting them know that you care about this. You value who they are as an individual, who you bring every day, all the time. And I'll add this piece, which I'm glad is changing. Emotions are back in the workplace. That holistic self isn't back. So how are we incorporating, because put your head down and get to work. Not saying that we're not going to accomplish goals, but that whole self needs to be included in this conversation.
Yeah, I love what both of you said. And just to add to that, I think creating space to get to know those people one-on-one, right? So that open door policy that we've all heard, but like, is it really open door because your back's to the door, right? Type of thing. But like, you're creating space in the office, you're creating space in the presence, you're going to the people you work with and saying, hey, how are you? What's your weekend? And oh, what's that, right? Like Ankit just talked to me about Bali and like had this whole breakdown of conversation. It's leaning into getting to know who are you and what makes you tick, so that I know how I can work with you and lead you and connect with you.
So open door policy and the focus groups and that intentionality around checking in with people. Are there more formalized ways that businesses can and should be doing check-ins? And it, like I'm thinking like employee surveys or satisfaction, or do those tools have a place in creating culture, and how should we be using them if they do?
I think they have a place, but I think sometimes people can go into things kind of checking boxes. And so for me, I have been a part of, and I hear a lot of clients saying, all right, we need to do a survey. We need to do a focus group. Then what? Right? Because I've completed a lot of surveys at corporations and I've seen no results happen from those surveys, right? So it's really, again, saying, okay, I'm not just checking a box, but what do I care about? What am I willing to invest in? Right? And then following it out all the way. So the survey is not a box on its own. The survey is a step in the process, and continuing that, right? Continuing it with the focus groups, continuing it with professional development or individual development plans, continuing it with conversations.
And I'll add to Varsity, absolutely, because we do way too many surveys and we all know survey fatigue. But the point is, how are we continuously inviting employees back for the next steps? Because there's many times decisions are getting made, and I'm not saying every single decision has to be driven by the entire organization, because nothing would get done. I get that. But in these kind of conversations, you do need to bring them back and saying, here's the feedback, here's some suggestions. Now let's have a conversation about what do we want to do together.
In that action planning or the response to the survey, I totally agree. Invite contrary voices. You have to have the person who is showing up with what could all go wrong to make it all go right. And I learned this way back from a leader who, there was always one woman who was difficult. And I felt she was really difficult. And he's like, yeah, but if we don't win her over, nobody else is coming along. good point. So it's really important you invite the difficult or you're not going to get to what you want.
Yeah, I
And-
think the difficult too is sometimes the disruptor. And we
Correct.
need disruptors.
Yes. And to me, I think great point. I call that diversity of thought.
Mm.
No, thank you for that, because I think that is a good reminder. I mean, sometimes, in our desire to please everyone or to make everything go smoothly, we want to kind of, make sure that those voices maybe don't have, back to what you were saying earlier, Varsity, have a space to share. We focus a lot on hiring because that is, an issue for everyone. Where do we find people? And I think that we do a really pretty good job, along with all of you that are our partners in that space, to help find people. But that's only part of the story, right? I mean, we hire people, and then the real work begins of retention and satisfaction and growth and development of people. How can a business articulate what their culture is like through that full life cycle? Starting with recruiting all the way through, the retention efforts and development. What are your thoughts on that? I know we could probably talk for an hour just on that question.
Oh my gosh, yes. So I would say storytelling is quite powerful. And how are we showcasing successes and integrating these conversations, with people that are coming on? That whole life cycle, right? How many of us in our organization, we're awesome in our brand, bringing people on, but how often do we check in at 30, 60, 90? And when I say check in, don't just talk about surveys. I really mean check in to see how are you doing? How are you feeling? Where do you see yourself? How do you want to grow? How can we support you? That's what I'm talking about, because with, all generations, but younger generations are going to continue to ask for those things. And by the way, they're asking it in the interviews. So no longer we can hide from this.
Yeah, I think for me, I even think about, my mind's going to the recruitment process. And I would love to see, if I was looking for a job and I go to a company's website, right, and you see all the pictures and you see the mission, you see all that, I would love to see real testimonials from people that work there or have worked there that are exposing them. Like, I want to know the good stuff. I want to know how they got it wrong and they tried to get it right. Like, I want to hear from your people to see really what's the heart of your company, because that's who's going to tell you straight up, right? The people that work there or that have experienced it. And then I feel like that's a fit and I connect with that, well, I'm going to apply, right? You kind of got my interest peaked. So like, show me, be vulnerable and expose who you are, right, to that talent, so that you truly don't just get a seat at the table, you get the cultural seat, the person that's bought in to your work and what you do.
So yes, and I think having a clear, we're a small, mid-sized business, right? What is it you want? What do you want to represent to your employees? What do you want your company to represent to your customers or your partners? So being very clear and intentional about that, what am I shooting for? And then create the path. So what do those behaviors look like? What are the symbols? What are the rituals? What is the reward system? All of the components that create your business must align to your desired outcome, because you may be unintentionally cutting your nose off to spite your face, right? You've set something up that's rewarding behaviors that are not aligned with your culture. So every component of the employee experience needs to be evaluated through the lens of who we are, how we show up, and the behaviors we want to see. You'll know that you've accomplished that kind of culture when your peers are your guardrails. When new people join your organization, they'll be the ones saying, that's not how we work here. Or let me show you how we do it. Let me bring you along to a customer experience so you see the experience we want the customer to have. That's when you know everybody is bought in, everybody's aligned with what you're looking for. But if you don't know what it looks like, they're not going to know what it looks like.
Can I also just add one more point? So employees are also looking for diverse representation in all across the organization, not just the frontline workers, right? And then also, how are we effectively equipping our mid-level management to support their direct reports? Because this is where, in order to really have that understanding, managers are such a crucial part of the organization, and they help set the culture and even deeper create psychological safety, for their employees within. So if managers don't know, and I know I've definitely worked for enough organizations where managers like, I don't have any training, or they were just put into a manager role without, because they were good at their projects and they got promoted, right? Whatever the reason is. But managers are wanting to do a great job, and the mid-level management, we all know, is squished in many different ways, and it has been for a long time. But now, in this crucial times, we really need to support those managers and helping them realize how they are setting a tone for their employees and creating that psychological safety and having those conversations is really also going to help us set up for that culture that employees are wanting.
And if I may, I know, because you said we could talk about this forever. Such a great point on Keith. And I think, what does that support look like? It has to start from the top. So there are so many of us that may be at the top and we're like, okay, how do I support? How do I train? How do I do this? You, it starts with you. You have to do the work yourself, so that not only are you training middle management to support, the front line, but they get the support from you, right? And that Capital One commercial where you give it, you get it, and you give it. That's how it works. So the more work you do, right, it trickles down.
What I was going to say the exact same thing. And then you are an executive coach, right? You are certified. That's a behavior that you can learn and teach. And so you need to become the best coach on your team, and you need to coach your directs and help them coach their directs, because it all comes down to that personal relationship we talked about. Years and years and years in leadership development training. And I'm a fan, but it only goes as far as my will to use, right? So the coaching aspect is where you're keeping them guided to what they've committed to, keeping them on track to the behaviors and the culture that you want to see. So it is very, very much dependent on the top of the house. The culture flows downhill. And I would say one quote I saw recently on LinkedIn was like, culture is defined by the worst behavior that you're willing to tolerate. So think about that a minute. Every action you make impacts your culture, isn't it?
Yeah, say that again.
Your culture is defined by the worst behavior you're willing to tolerate.
Pretty powerful.
Mhm.
No, you guys just brought home where I was going to go next too, is because I want to tie a couple things together philosophically around the vulnerable leadership question, to things like as nuts and bolts as making an onboarding not an orientation, right? It's not just there to check boxes and to get paperwork filled out and to get you signed up for insurance and everything else. There's an opportunity in that space as well to create, to identify and articulate your culture. So let's start first with that vulnerable leader. Like, what does that look like? I mean, from the executive coaching perspective, from all of your perspectives, how do I lead with vulnerability? It almost seems to be counterintuitive. Like, what does that look like, and how do I do that?
I think so. To me, it's one and the same. So going back to that storytelling, right, is me exposing myself, right? Me doing those scary things first. And as the leader, I think it's kind of just like, if, for the parents, it's like the burden's on you to take the first step, to mirror, to show what it looks like and normalize that vulnerability, right, as a part of the culture. So it really, again, it starts back with you taking that step.
Yeah, I said I led a learning function, and technical training became really big, and using technology and all the tools, and that was not my bailiwick at all, right? So I literally went to my tech team to say, okay, this isn't my space. How important is it to you that I know this? Because I don't, and I'm relying on you. I'm trusting you to tell me what's current. I'm trusting you to tell me what's good, and I'll learn it. I'll get there, but right now I don't know that. So you tell me, is that a deal breaker for you? Because I will go do what I need to do. They were like, you don't need to know that stuff. That's what we're here to do. But you need to get stuff out of the way. I'm like, oh, thank God, but right, exactly. But, by putting yourself out there, it doesn't mean you're incompetent. It just means this isn't my space today, but if I need to, I'll get there, right? So vulnerability doesn't have to be I'm opening up my veins, giving you all my blood and sharing every personal thought. It's how does it apply to the situation today? And am I being authentic about it?
Mm.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to add, and so to me, I think it's a culture shift that we need to make in our organizations where leaders feel that they can be vulnerable. They don't have to have all the answers. And when can you step in as a leader, I actually don't know. How many leaders will say that, right? I don't understand, or I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to go look this up. But many times I think leaders feel, and this is not just one organization, one leader, I think it's our society expecting leaders to be in this pedestal when guess what? We're all human and we don't know everything, and that's okay. And we should be accepting that it's okay not to know. Here's another one. When leaders fail at something, when can they share that in a way that's not going to impede their department projects, but be vulnerable, saying, you know what, we let this project and it did not go well. And here's what happened, but here's what we can do together.
So just a quick personal story on that. I have a really good friend from high school, and she teaches first year students in programming at a small college, Shippensburg University over in Pennsylvania. And she gets new freshmen every year. And these are really bright kids that are coming from their high school, but they're super struggling when they get to her class. It's hard. It's like something they haven't experienced. And years ago, she realized that. She realized they're struggling. And part of what's getting in their way is them telling themselves, I can't do this. This is too hard. So what my friend started doing was every new semester, she'd take up something she'd never done before. So one semester she took up rollerblading. So you'd see Carol like gliding through campus, like with the inability to stop. One year she took up crocheting, but she did it all openly and vulnerably in front of her students so that they were watching her, try to learn something that she'd never done before. And face some of the hiccups and the literal bruises along the way. And it was very impactful. She's kept that in now for years because it's really helped encourage her students, and she's learned all sorts of new things too. So I love that idea of being able to kind of show up and, I don't know how to do this either, but we're going to get through it. I'm going to go back to that nuts and bolts question of how do we differentiate, Ankit talked about touching base every 30 to 60, 90 days when someone's a new hire, but let's make that just above and beyond checking boxes. How do you move from a orientation focus to a true onboarding focus? What does that look like?
I'll take it. Back to intentional on everything you do. If you think about yourself and learning something new, you don't do everything overnight perfectly, right? And so sometimes in the new hire training, we throw the book at everybody and expect that, in a month they're going to get it. Not going to happen. So break it down, build skill, build the things that are most important, and focus at the same time on not just the outcome, but how you do it, what the behavior looks like. We so often forget the behavior, but that's what helps build your culture. And then that needs to be reinforced. And I know people say, oh God, they get a paycheck. Well, they can get a paycheck anywhere. What they want is to feel good about what they're doing. So as they accomplish, reinforce the desired behavior. Back to let's not try to fix all the problems. We're going to capitalize on the strengths, reinforce the desired behavior, and continue it. Symbols are really good too. I used to just give out buttons. And it seemed to me like really silly at first, but the first button I gave, you would have thought it was like $1 million prize because it was just a public acknowledgement of how this project, this task, this output contributed to the team and contributed to the organization. And then people, when I knew it was successful, would come, would you give Darcy a button? She did this for me. That's when you know that symbol has meaning, that symbol has stuck. And these symbols don't have to cost a lot of money. Hewlett Packard used to give out little bananas, like banana pins. I don't know what it meant, but it was important to them, right? So think about, again, intentionality and continual reinforcement in everything. And if you have a buddy or a peer that you think is a really good role model, partner that with your new hire. partner that person to teach, this is who we are, this is how we show up.
Yeah, and you know what, so many great points. Thank you. And I would say it is so important, and some organizations are doing this. What I'm about to share is pair them up with a mentor within an organization um, who may, you know, and sometimes what happens is like you get paired up with somebody who's been there for, I'm going to say 10 years. Well, their availability and capacity may not be what it might be. I mean, there's a great intentionality of that connection, but I think it's even better if we can connect these new folks to somebody who's just been there 1 year, 1.5 years, and then they can share their journey and story and some of the challenges that they have experienced and how they have overcome and how they're there for support. So that's number one. And then number two, I can't emphasize, I have met leaders in the past through my coaching that never sets one-on-one meetings. They go months. They have their department meeting, but they don't have one-on-ones. Now, in those one-on-ones, it's a great opportunity to build that relationship and really meet employee where he, she, or they are at, right? And connect at their level and make them feel valued and supported, that you are there to support them and guide them and mentor them, whatever they need, so they're going to be successful. I say this to my trainers all the time. When you are successful, I'm successful, and our chief learning officer is successful.
Yeah, I like that. So many things. So the one-on-ones absolutely reoccurring, and like honor the time, right? Because I've been scheduled with one-on-ones with leaders, and I knew they were easily dismissed. If something came up that was more important on their schedule, they'd reschedule with me, and that sends a message, right? So honoring that time, just like you had a meeting with the CEO, you wouldn't reschedule with them, right? Also, I love to tell my clients to like just create blank spaces on your calendar that is open space for someone to just pop in and say, hey, I need to chat, right? And schedule 15, 20 minutes with you to just chat, because the busier we are, the more higher up we are in leadership, we know our calendars booked, right? And so when people want to chat or have something that's time sensitive, there's no space for them, to hold that. Something else that I really love is remembering the why. So when you're checking back in on those one-on-ones in that open space, if you during onboarding got that individual development plan from them and you understood their why and what their goals are and where they want to be, you can always center everything back to that, right? Holding them accountable and then holding yourself accountable to provide them resources to support that why.
Love all of that. And I give you some practical suggestions too. So in that onboarding, regardless of role level, give them a 30, 60, 90 day. What does good look like at the end of 30 days? What does good look like at the end of 60 days? Because that'll break it down and make it manageable for them. If they're looking at this big job and when am I expected to be totally doing that big job, that will really help. It's like losing weight. You lose 1 pound at a time. You don't lose 30 pounds in one day. So helping them manage the new, first tip. Second, when you have, regardless of your level and that new employee, ask questions like, is this what you expected? Are we what you expected? And if not, why not? That helps you. Am I hiring correctly? Am I recruiting correctly? Am I being honest in my recruitment? And what do I need to change or do differently if it's not showing up the way I thought it was showing up? Because that's your way of checking your organization. Are we honoring our commitments? And if not, why not? So then you do your root cause analysis. Where did things go wrong? And in those questions, don't forget, what could we do better for you? What's missing in this experience for you? Back to the personalization. If you keep it employee focused and employee centric, doesn't mean you're giving away the house. It means you're paying attention to the needs and you accommodate where you can. And if you can't, you tell them why you can't.
I love that. If I may, I love that question of, am I meeting your expectations? And I would say, if anyone loves that as much as I do, be ready for the answer, because they were probably going to say something that's going to shock the heck out of you. So be open and ready for that.
No, I love all of those ideas. And I'm thinking, we have represented on our panel, the public education. We have a very large company. We have a solopreneur. So we have businesses and organizations of all size and all different industry intention. And I'm wondering, are there advantages? When I think about like a small businesses, the vast majority of our chamber membership are small businesses. Are there advantages to a small business in stuff we've been talking about, and are there challenges? And how can we address both?
So I'll say, being in small business, I think this is a plus and a minus. Most small businesses are wearing multiple hats, right? We all have multiple roles. So what's going to become important when you have an employee who is, let's just say, has 3 hats for whatever reason? How are we intentionally checking in with that person? And are we asking these questions often? How are you today? That question can open up conversation that you would not believe. And that sometimes we don't even ask because we're so busy into our day-to-day and getting things done. So checking in for sure. And then I think about, depending on what's happening, in your own small business and the challenges that you're facing, and how are we inviting them to share those challenges and be vulnerable in those conversations about how can we work together through these challenges? Because I think when we get into this space where being comfortable with the uncomfortable, it is so hard for everyone, but we need to lean into that more and more, because that's what employees are looking for. They want you to talk about things that are not easy, right? How do we talk about difficult things out loud and process them and discuss them? I understand we have many different learning styles, understanding. Some people may need more time to go back and think and reflect and assess and all those things, which we allow, but we need to have more open dialogues about challenging things that are happening in our businesses.
So to get back to the question, my personal opinion, smaller is easier because you have a lot more control of things. You see things more quickly, you see things easier. And you can, as I said, get the peer group helping you mold, shape, inform. That doesn't mean it's not possible in larger organizations. In larger organizations, there's usually a functional area or there's a team that reports up through a functional space. And that leader can create a subculture. Every organization has a subculture, whether you want it or not, it's there. It just depends on how strong it is. So if you're in an organization that maybe the culture isn't working for you, you can create the culture you want in your line of business. You can create the culture you want in your department. And that will give you satisfaction. That will give your employees satisfaction. They'll understand the expectations of you. Now, that doesn't mean that in large organizations, it's impossible. It's not. I actually work for an organization, and interestingly, we were trying to drive culture in one massive organization, wasn't moving. I went to a mid-sized company and I experienced it. I saw it the minute I walked in the door, and I was like, wow, how did you do this? They taught it. They taught it from day one. They had an actual curriculum about it. People were required to do it, go through it, and then they were evaluated on it. Genius. This is who we are. This is how we show up. These are the behaviors we expect of you. And then the leadership would coach to it. So yes, very intentional, but very powerful, very effective. Turnover rate in that company was 8%. It's incredible. Yeah.
Right. Talking about like being able to know you're doing something right with the culture.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off of Rose, I could easily say ditto, but it's small businesses. My niche is small businesses just because of ease. Honestly, there's not as much red tape. If there is red tape, it's like Scotch tape versus duct tape. So you can really I can see a change and see the impact that it has. Bigger companies it's a lot more to break through. And it doesn't mean that one wants it or is working for it, more than the other. It's just layers.
And I think throughout, kind of threading through all this, we're talking about creating workplaces and spaces where people feel a sense of belonging, where they know how and when and where they can contribute and what that looks like. One of the challenges that I hear from members, occasionally is about, we have 5 generations in the workforce right now. At the same time, we have a multi-generational workforce, from traditionalists to baby boomers to
Gen X to millennials to Gen Z. And we got more coming up, that we don't have names for yet. So when you're leading an organization, when there are multi-generations, and going back to something you said earlier, Ankit, like we're all informed by our own personal lives and experience and what we grew up with and what we lived through. How do you lead and create spaces where all of those generations feel that they belong and that they all have a place and a role to play?
One simple way, ask. Like connect and ask and how they want to engage. How do they want to contribute? You'd be surprised how many times leaders make assumptions about how, and we have our departmental goals, we have our organizational goals, and that's woven through our mission, vision, work we do. But how often do we ask our individual contributors or people that we're leading is, so what do you think your strengths are? Or how do you, what does your belonging look like, right? And how can I support that?
Yeah, and it's like in order to ask, we're going to assume that there's trust and safe and psychological safety, and you feel comfortable, right? Safe to ask. Otherwise, no one's asking because you don't know if your head's going to get chopped off, right, for that question. But I also think so. Brene Brown, obsessed with her. For those that know, social sciences, she's amazing. But she has this thing that she does that stays with me, and it's: are you a learner or are you a knower? Right. So if you go into any space being a learner, you're inquisitive and you ask questions instead of saying, I'm older or I'm younger, right? And I know this thing already. Go in as if you know nothing. And that's where space can be created for you to learn and create more inclusion.
Yeah, in creating a space, we just had an interesting conversation about generations. And, Kelly and I are from a different generation of Marcy, and she was like, "Oh my God, really? That's how it was." But it was a good example, I think, of where the sharing and where the knowledge transfer occurs, but it's not something that's naturally set up in the work environment. It's really not. So by pairing generations together and giving them opportunities in deliberate fashions to work together, they can share experiences that are relevant today and that were relevant in the 70s and see what's common or not. The other thing, I think everybody wants challenging and purpose-driven work. Back to what Darcy does in terms of what do you like to do, regardless of your age, there's things you like to do, regardless of how you were brought up in your value system, there's things you like to do. And there may be commonality between generations that you're able to capitalize on that. So focusing on the ability, the possibility versus the label, it will work. It will work itself out.
I'm going to add just two more specific things. Communication. We got to diversify our communication strategies within our organization. Okay. And I am really talking about, yes, email, we all use it, right? But how are we using different social media channels for some younger generations? Because in order to create belonging, we have to have diverse communication strategies. And I know we all probably in some shape or form have used Teams. So like Teams channel, to blog posts, to whatever. There are even now digital signs that are being used in some organizations where you can go and get the information quickly. Diversify your communication strategies. Number two, going back to, I'm going to intentionally say informal mentoring program. Informal. We're not assigning people. We are creating channels where they can connect organically with one another based on their strengths, and this needs to be mutually beneficial. Both parties are learning from each other, not only one, right? So if we're gonna want these generations to collaborate and interact, there needs to be common understanding and how they both can learn from each other's experiences.
One more, you just prompted something in my head too. Again, if we're thinking small or departmental or mid-sized business, who's good at what, right? So if it's communicated as such, then they know Akita is my go-to for this and Varsity is my go-to for that. And everybody has their expertise regardless of age, regardless of generation. it's creating that equal playing field that we're all contributing in a different way. And I will learn from you and I will learn from you and vice versa. So call it out. This is what everybody brings to the table and it's great.
And one more add too, because you prompted something with me about the effective communication. So my trainer hat went on. So if we're using Teams or Zoom or Slack or Miro, I mean, there's so many things, right? Make sure there's a training in place that level sets everyone. Don't assume that some people know and some people don't know. Use, right, the SMEs, the subject matter experts, to say, hey, you're really good at recording. Would you like to record a Loom for us? So teach us how to use Miro, right? And then you get it out there, right? You've level set everyone because you put these systems and these ways to communicate in place, and it sometimes clogs it instead of supports it because you haven't put in a training first.
And this comes back circle, right? Let's not make assumptions. What people know, what they don't know. Let's ask open-ended questions and let's collect feedback.
So just an observation, we haven't talked once yet about like having a foosball table or pizza on Friday, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you've got that, that's awesome. But what we're really talking about that informs culture is how we set up the workplace and the work to honor the people and to engage the people, because we want to keep the people once we've brought them on board, and we want them to be productive because that's why we're all there. You guys mentioned mentoring, and I want to talk a little bit about other ways that we can bring people together around shared experiences. So ERGs, employee resource groups, ARGs, associate resource groups. How do those work? And what are the benefits and maybe some of the pitfalls of creating ERGs and ARGs?
Benefits is it creates a community. It creates a space where, you know, some populations can kind of find a cultural home, a subcultural home. I think the downfall that it can be is to say, okay, we did this thing, we're done. That's all we need. I think sometimes it's not, there isn't like an executive leader that's an ambassador as a part of that ERG that can say, hey, when issues come up, who is supporting this group that has, you know, the ear of someone that can actually, you know, affect change. I think it should also be made up of not only the people of that group, but allies and disruptors. So it's a gift and a curse. I think if you are creating an ERG or an ARG, you really should be getting with, you know, someone that has some experience with DEI to really kind of make sure that it is intentional and is a big part of the overall culture, and that you're not just checking a box to say, okay, let's give like these people over here what they asked for, and that's it, we're done.
Yeah, and they can help drive change, a positive change of things that are needed by that population that you may not even be aware of, or they can share with you, like we're talking about a gender transition policy right now, and the language we were using, our LGBTQ group said that's not accurate. So before we started down this path, we were able to prevent ourselves from stepping in a pile, right? So that's really helpful. Back to the downside, they can go rogue. Sometimes those subcultures aren't as helpful as you would like them to be because there isn't somebody paying attention and guiding and helping lead them through the norms. And starting them up is extremely laborious. So if you're going to take that on, be really intentional and get some help.
So I'll say this is, I'm going to do a shameless plug for Columbus State. We just hired a couple months ago an ERG manager who will then, because we have, I want to say between 5, if not 6 ERGs currently, right? But then to me, somebody who used to be at Ohio State, I was the young professional ERG chair and have led it. And that governance structure. And, you know, here's the piece. There's all these like logistical things that you have to do in ERGs. But where I saw opportunity at Ohio State and now at Columbus State is intentional collaboration and integration across all ERGs. Because and it's funny we're talking about this now, I had a meeting yesterday with an individual at the college who wants to develop a new ERG in collaboration with the ERG manager. They're like, can we just call it like an inclusive ERG? So everyone can attend and it's not just African American, not just, LGBTQ or veterans or what have you. We need someone where everyone can have a belonging. I'm like, that is fantastic. And it's not that the individual identities are not important. They are, right? I am an Asian and Asian Pacific group I've been part of before, and I value that identity. But in this workplace, I want to get to know people who are different than me. How do I understand others who haven't been raised the same way I have? How do I understand their background and experience better? And ERGs is a great way to effectively network across organization to build those relationships. More importantly, understanding different people, right? And how do they show up and how do they work? And, how do I build those relationships across? So, gosh, I can go on.
As we are getting kind of towards the end of our talk, and then we open up the floor to all of you. But what I usually ask at this point in our experience series of our panel, what do you see coming? Like, what are things that are coming in the building inclusive and fostering inclusive cultures and in workspaces and places where people want to be? Are there things on the horizon, or things that you see coming in the next year or so?
So I'll jump in, and because here's the piece that I keep hearing and it's going to continue. No more formative cultures. What do I mean by that, right? No more just, I'm going to have this great mission statement out there, or I'm going to hire this one DE&I person, or I'm going to do this one initiative. It is not enough. Employees are seeing right through it. And I don't care if you have a brand in Forbes or Business Insider, whatever. It's important, but that's not what's going to bring them in and retain them. They really want to see representation, diverse representation across different positions, not just the front line. And then additionally, belonging. I can't emphasize, like, how will I belong in this organization? What does that look like? And how are you sharing that story through employees who've been in your organization 1 year, 3 year, 10 years? Show me, not just put it on a sticker and say this is amazing. No longer enough.
So I took that from a different perspective. In my seat, I'm looking at an organization across 6 states, a lot of employees and various backgrounds. And even from states, there's cultures in each of the states that are unique and different. So that makes the complexity of the situation. But one thing remains constant. And when I'm looking at the horizon, as society goes, so goes the behavior in my organization. So do not discount what is happening in society. It will come into your organization, and you need to figure out how much you want to embrace that, how much you want to take it head on, or what kind of rules and behavioral expectations you want to put into place. But this is a pivotal year, right, from an election perspective. And I think it will have some downstream impacts in the workplace. That's at least I'm anticipating them and gearing up for them. So just watch trends on the news, things that you're hearing, whatever, and see, am I seeing that in my organization? Has behavior changed? Could that be a trigger to it? I don't know, but I have definitely noticed it in our world.
I could squeeze you in the best kind of way because I just love that. In my brain, I was connecting societal to organizational as well, because again, whole self comes in, right? And I am really excited for where things are going. I think I'm privileged enough that COVID was a blessing and it created a lot of awareness. And I think a lot of people in the society have had that as well, whether it was a blessing or not. And so people are really more leaned into, okay, I've had the space to say, who am I and what do I need? And does this serve me? Right? And is this working for me? And do I like how things are going in my life and the world around me? And you can't unsee once you've seen. So you're just going to keep seeing. And with that seeing becomes a knowing, and it becomes a more openness to really lean into those hard, uncomfortable topics for yourself and for others, and how you're showing up and how community is showing up with you. And I think as an organization, you're only going to get more people speaking up, right? That quiet quitting it's not going to be so quiet, right? And that people are going to be very leaned into, does this space serve me?
And just to kind of continue on that, momentum. One thing that COVID has taught us, and I think we all have heard this in some capacity, is before COVID, we really paid attention to work. Work is important, all of that. I think COVID has taught us, guess what? Life matters more. I value family, I value my loved ones, whatever, right? So from that perspective, how are we helping to create happiness at the workplace? Because employees are coming in, and I'm sure we all know about the gig economy and how many employees are part of the gig economy, and they can and they can make money. So compensation is important, but that's not the end all. They are looking for belonging, that happiness. And how are you, from the beginning, from that interview process, showing me your culture?
So thank you all. So what questions or comments do you have for the panel?
So I've heard you talk a lot about communication, and what's been running through my mind is I think a lot of times we assume that when people come into an organization, they may have worked somewhere for a period of time, that they know how to communicate in conflict. They know how to have a conversation with their supervisor or even their peer when some of the societal issues come into play. And a lot of the work that we do is helping people go into organizations, but they encounter conflict. And so things may happen, okay, well, you don't fit the culture. But what have you seen as far as tools that companies can use with their employees to deal and have those conversations, how to advocate for themselves? Or have you seen any tools?
I have actually. When George Floyd happened in society, and that whole year-long process, right, that we all went through, and the impacts, emotional impacts. Our CEO set up deliberate meetings and invited people. They didn't have to attend, but invited people to come and talk about it. And from your perspective in this organization, what could we do better? What are we doing wrong? Is there something we could do to help your experience? So hit it head on from, we're not perfect. Clearly society's not perfect. So we don't want to show up in the news that way someday. We want to get ahead of it and figure out what we can do better. So, and I learned that again back from that guy who brought the disruptor to the table. He always just hit things right head on. Like, let's sit down and have a conversation and let me have it. But back to your comment about conflict, having been in, again, HR a really long time, most people avoid it like the plague. They do, which is what leads to further conflict. So the earlier you catch it, the more chance you have of succeeding. So fast and furious.
Yeah, I think I've had the most success with coaching is when I identify people's style, or when they meet conflict. I kind of meet conflict head on, and that can be deemed as aggressive. But some people are, like you said, they're tiptoeing around it, or they're just running, turning their back on it. So once you identify what their style is, coaching them through, why are you showing up this way, right? Because it's deeper than just the conflict, the issue that's being presented. So coaching to me is always a great tool to use for that.
Definitely agree with Darcy, that culture of coaching. And, and also I think it's employees, before even conflict comes, how important, or what have you done to help build trust? Trust has to be there in order to be able to even discuss conflict, because people close up. We all know, right? When conflict comes up. So that's where knowing your employee and meeting where they are and celebrating successes when they happen, because when challenge comes, they will want to connect with you and share with you, here's what I'm struggling with and here's why. But none of that happens without building trust.
What other comments or questions, Rebecca?
Good morning. Going to share just a thought first and then a question. So a thought, have any of you ever heard the quote, culture is how your employees feel on Sunday afternoon? I'll say that again. Culture is how your employees feel on Sunday afternoon. Now, if you're not afraid to raise your hand, and if you are, that's okay too, you can think about it. But who in this room has ever had the Sunday scaries, right? That's a real thing, right? Now, thankfully, I'm privileged to work for an organization where I have like the Sunday happiness, right? Because I can't wait until I go to work on Monday morning. But a lot of people still have that. So that's just a thought I wanted to throw out there. And then my question would be, we talked a lot about sense of belonging and a sense of connectedness. So now in this great resignation, great restoration, great rethink, we keep coming up with different words. How, maybe an example from any or all of you on how you're creating a sense of belonging and connectedness in a distributed workforce. So whether you're remote first, whether you're hybrid, whether you're fully in, sense of belonging and connectedness in a distributed workforce.
So that's a great question. And this is something I do feel that I do it every day, all the time. And here's how, right? Is in going back to those one-on-ones when I have with my supervisees, I am always asking, how can I support you better? I am always asking, I've seen you succeed, but here's where I can see, where I can help you challenge. How do you feel about that? Or how do you want to be challenged? And where do you see yourself in your career? And how can I help you get you there? Because everybody has mission driven, right? Like they're driven to get to wherever they want to aspire to be. And I do think it is managers' role in every organization, every industry to step up and realize that your talent, don't hold it tight. Let it go, right? Develop them. And even when they leave your organization, if they leave in a positive manner, they're going to say amazing things about you and they may come back. Belonging is who they are as an individual. How are you understanding what their individual needs are, how they want to learn, how they want to contribute, how they want to show up, how they want to send emails, whatever it is. How are we recognizing those individual needs and meeting each employee where they are?
Yeah, and I don't think there's a huge difference in how you lead the individual. I think everything that we've said is still applicable in a distributed. What I think has to be more deliberate and intentional is how do those that are remote contribute and it be visible. So I have a distributed team right now, and we take turns who leads our weekly staff meeting, and they have to contribute. They set the agenda, they contact if we're going to have a speaker, they talk to their peers about, I need you to do this. So giving everybody a role to play, regardless if they're in the building or not in the building, is really helpful. Back to how do I contribute and what's my success story that I'm giving to the team. I think those are just the ways you do it. I don't really think it's magic, but it is intentional.
Yeah, I like that. That was pretty much exactly what I was going to say. Finding where people tick, where they get their feel goods and joy from, and utilizing that space, especially for the ones that are remote. I also like the idea of creating space in the workday if they're remote and local to say, hey, here's some space. We have, GBQ is going to have food and drinks and whatever, and from 2 to 4, you guys can go to there. It's not mandatory, but go there, support, and socialize together, creating those spaces during the workday as well.
What other comments or questions you may have?
That one over here, Kelly.
You mentioned the 5 generations currently in the workforce. What advice do you have? We talked about communication, we talked about transparency, but what advice do you have, especially for the more experienced generations dealing with our newer generations coming in?
I would say one of the best things you can do is connecting with them and saying, you can learn from them. There's something that you can take away from them, from their experience, and giving them a space to say, I value you and I value all the experience you have. So how can we work together? But literally creating a mutually beneficial relationship where you are going and saying, I've seen you do such a great job in this project or initiative, and I would appreciate opportunity learning from you.
I think, Don, for me, it's truly just that. It's that, am I a learner or a knower? and going into that space saying, yes, I have all this experience, but perhaps maybe this person can give me something that I need. I think too, it's nice too that I have, I've been the newer person and connecting with someone more experienced, and I think they saw me, they discounted me because I reminded them of a grandchild or a child, right? And so they discounted me. And then as we worked together, there was some awareness of like, wait a minute, you actually know more than I thought you knew. And perhaps now my grandchild or child knows more than I thought they knew, right? And you get some mutual respect and awareness throughout your life. Just being open to learning from anyone.
I have really nothing to add. I think it all goes back to everything we've already talked about.
Mhm.
Just no assumptions.
Yeah, question over there.
So I actually work for one of the states that Rose mentioned. So I work for Columbia Gas and love working with NiSource and Columbia Gas. We do have an amazing executive leadership team who truly does support DE&I initiatives, and they want to create the culture. And my question is that we talked a little bit about middle management, how middle management gets squeezed from both sides. And as many companies, we've gone through a lot of changes, whether we're talking about how we work, whether from home or in the office, the pandemic, but additionally organizational changes and some of the ways that the responsibilities that departments have and the way that employees are being asked to do different things outside of what they've done for the last however many years. And so change is hard. We all know that. My question is in regards to the culture, our larger employee base, those that are just doing the work every day, they're not leading people, they're just here to do their job. A lot of times there are departments and areas where they may bring concerns or issues or challenges to their leader, which might be that middle level leadership. And because that middle level leadership is being asked to implement these changes from upper level leadership and being told we need to, perform, these are expectations, this is what we want to see happen. A lot of times those concerns or questions, problems that people are bringing forward are kind of being ignored or being told like it's going to be fine, just work through it, and maybe not being trickled up the way it could be. And so my question is, how do we effectively help that subculture? How do we implement a system and help train or coach or build up that middle level leadership so that they understand that inclusive DE&I, all of those initiatives are not just about being fair to people who look different than us, but also listening to individual voices and allowing them the space to say, this isn't working for me and I need help working through this, or you're not, the upper level leadership isn't the one doing this work and they don't understand how this is being effective or how this is impacting us. How do we help kind of build that bridge so that their concerns are being relayed and being considered in some of those changes that we're seeing happen so frequently?
Are you saying that like the middle management, it kind of gets lost, like clogged right there?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I think for me, what's coming up for me is, do the middle managers have a voice? Do they feel like their voice will be heard and valued and appreciated? Right? Because frontline workers they're really at the top, right, of any organization that's doing it right. They know what's going on and what's needed. And there's sometimes, usually, the voices that get ignored. So the middle management is like, yay, these are the people I really need to be listening to because they, right, are right in tune with the frontline workers. And I think sometimes from upper leadership, that gets discounted and there's no value with that. So to me, what's coming up is, has upper leadership, executive leadership, realized the value of middle management and used that?
And I'll say that those mid-level managers need so much support regular basis, and that support can be strategic. I have seen organizations that either on a monthly basis or every other month basis brings those mid-level managers together, and it's led by either HRBP, human resource business partner, or a learning development facilitator on what's happening across the organization. What common challenges are these mid-level managers facing? Peer-to-peer learning, is one of the best ways. So they get opportunity as mid-level managers to connect with one another and learn about their challenges and what can they do together, right? And sometimes even inviting the executive leadership into those conversations to hear what's happening and what are they experiencing, and then how can they advise and support that too. So that's a strategy that can be implemented.
Yeah, and middle management is the hardest job. It is absolutely the hardest job. And you raise really good points. Something we are going to be doing from my team is doing listening tours, similar to what you're talking about, and sending representatives from my team out just to go through a state, stop at the big locations, advertise we're going to be there, have some focus groups, and just let people talk. But it is a challenge the larger your organization is to get that. Love listening to it.
Thank you, everybody. We are getting to that point of the end of our formal conversation, but we encourage you to hang around and chat more with our panel and with others here in the room. Join me please now in thanking our panel for their conversation this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now it's my pleasure to bring up Charlotte Joseph with Local IQ for our closing remarks this morning. And thank you again from all of us here at the Chamber.
Thank you all, and thank you to the panel. I am really, I have notes because I don't want to get this wrong today. It's too important. And I usually start by saying, my name's Charlotte and I work for the newspaper, and I'm sorry yours didn't get there this morning. But Local IQ and the Gannett Corporation are the owners of USA Today, a vast digital empire, and the Columbus Dispatch, Columbus Monthly, Columbus CEO, Columbus Parent, local publications that we are committed to. I am certainly committed to, having spent my entire career in advertising in Central Ohio. Big companies obviously have some advantages in terms of resources. And as I said, I want to get right the policy that's stated that we work by every day. And small companies can do this too. And I have shared this with friends and colleagues and said, look, just because I'm talking about workplace inclusion and diversity and culture in a multinational company doesn't mean that the same premise doesn't hold for a small business. Gannett is a very diverse workforce. On any given day, I'm dealing with billing people in Mumbai and designing people in the Philippines and the small Kinder Music owner in Dublin. So bringing that all together comes under our workforce culture. Gannett is intentional in stating and developing their corporate culture. We value strength and community, progress through passion, action with purpose, and belief in people. We solve problems together, believe collaborating early and often is key to transparency, and that our individuality drives innovation, broadens connections, and inspires growth. Inclusion, diversity, and equity are essential to our culture as an organization. Our behaviors drive the way we do business, including how we interact with each other, our customers, and our readers. Inclusion is what we do, diversity is who we are, equity is how we operate. We together believe that everyone should be able to bring their whole self to work and face the challenge and the opportunity together. Our Ally campaign is a company-wide initiative to educate and encourage employees to support and stand up for others in the workplace, all in an effort to provide an environment where everyone feels welcomed, included, and valued. We are committed to having a workplace where everyone feels safe to have open and sometimes difficult conversations about inclusion diversity, and equity. Now, this is the part that came into our statement last summer, and nobody's employer is perfect, but this one made me more proud of mine. Gannett stares down systemic racial injustice. The senseless killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor are but a few recent examples of devastating realities Black communities have faced for far too long. These deaths are not outliers, rather the outcomes of systemic racism, racial injustice, and inequalities that have plagued our history as a nation. That is a written part of Gannett's workforce culture statement. Corporately, along with our network of 260 local daily publications and USA Today, we stand in solidarity with Black communities as an ally in the fight against systemic racism, racial injustice, and discrimination in all forms. Yet at Gannett, as in all of our far-flung areas and regions in the world, Black Lives Matter. Part of our culture is driving supplier diversity. Our sourcing activities align with our employment inclusion and anti-discrimination policies. We expect the same level of respect and inclusion by supplier organizations as we do of ourselves. Internally, we partner closely with Gannett ERGs to promote opportunities for diverse suppliers. Externally, Gannett is a member of the National Minority Supplier Development Council. And walking the talk, our employee resource groups function as a platform to address the unique needs and issues of a global workforce. We have 12 active ERGs. Those include Vamos Forward, Next Gen Forward, Military, Pride, Sustainability, Mentally Forward. We seek to work together for common solutions and greater good in our workforce in specific and intentional ways. So sometimes from the outside looking in, I know you can't believe your paper didn't get delivered this morning. I think that about 3 days a week. But there's nothing I would rather do than work to support the work of journalists in our country. I'm proud to do that in a company that puts a value on workplace culture. Thanks for having us. Thanks to the chamber. Thanks for having the conversation. And I hope y'all have a great day.